Welcome to Money Sense, where we go beyond the numbers to help Canadians design a wealthier life. With host Brent Laux and trusted experts Kevin Hagedis and Andrew Rodick, partners at PWM Private Wealth Counsel and portfolio managers with Q Wealth. Whether you're preparing for retirement, designing tax-efficient income, or planning for future generations, financial decisions can be overwhelming. With a spotlight on pension-style investing strategies that prioritize long-term stability, Kevin, Andrew, and the PWM team will share their insights and perspectives to help you protect what you've worked a lifetime to build. This is Money Sense.
Hello and welcome to our Money Sense program. I'm Brent Laux, and we've got another fascinating show for our listeners and our viewers today. We're joined by Kevin Hagedis, of course, the man behind PWM Private Wealth Counsel. Kevin, also a portfolio manager with Q Wealth Partners. And Kevin is giddy with excitement, the fact that he has been able to get our next guest on the program today, Dr. Daniel Crosby, behavioral finance expert. Dr. Crosby, psychologist, author of The Soul of Wealth. In fact, Daniel is a New York Times bestselling author. He's published multiple books. We're really looking forward to diving a bit deeper with our discussion today. Kevin and Daniel, welcome to our Money Sense program.
Thank you. Thank you. Great to be here.
And this week, I understand we're going to be discussing a little bit about the human side of finance. Before we get started, Kevin, I know you have many times over the course of the past year on Money Sense talked about Daniel's book, The Soul of Wealth, and the influence that it's had on you and how this has helped shape your financial journey. Tell our listeners, our viewers, a little history about how you and Daniel ended up crossing paths.
Yeah, well, you know what? I've heard, of Daniel over the years and read a number of his books, and it really has changed the way I deal with clients. And I just want to start off by thanking him for coming on the show today. I'm super excited about this show, and I think our listeners are going to really enjoy this conversation. But I had the privilege of meeting Daniel about a year and a half ago now. We were at a conference in Huntington Beach, California called Future Proof. It's one of the largest financial conferences, I think the largest financial conference in the US. And he happened to be standing there, and I'm walking by and I'm going, I think that's Daniel Crosby. So I kind of hung out a little bit and waited till he was finished talking to some people, caught his attention, and then told him a little bit about PWM, told him about the radio show, and asked him if he'd be kind enough to be on the show. So he agreed to do that. And you already mentioned his book, The Soul of Wealth. And he's also got a podcast called Standard Deviations. And The Soul of Wealth, it's a really cool book. It's basically a compilation of 50 short essays that explores the meaning of wealth and provides practical suggestions for how to change your thinking and your actions, but to do it in like small, powerful ways is what he talks about. And to help people really create a wealthier life and to I think view money and wealth differently than maybe we have in the past.
Excellent. Welcome to the show, Daniel. And for those who don't know you, don't know your story, what's your background? How did you get to this point in your life?
Well, I think he was doing a great job. I want to hear more. I want to hear more about this legend he's describing. No, thank you. It's good to be here. So, I am a clinical psychologist by education. I think that's probably worth mentioning. Also worth mentioning that I'm the son of a financial advisor. And there was a time in my young adulthood when those two things came together because I started my journey toward a PhD at the ripe old age of 23, which I think is a great time to be dispensing life advice for a living. I think you've got it, got it pretty well figured out when you're 23. But by the time I was finishing that PhD at 27, I was already burning out of doing clinical work, of doing sort of the medical clinical side of being a student of human behavior. And so I approached my dad, who was and is a financial advisor, and I said, "Dad, look, I love studying humanity. I love thinking deeply about why people do the things that they do, but I just don't. This is kind of heavy. Like I don't know that I need to do it in this particular context. Do you have any career direction for me?" And my dad, this is, whatever, 17, 18 years ago, my dad did not know the words behavioral finance or behavioral economics, but he did know enough to say, "Hey, I know there's a lot of counseling and a lot of psychology in the work that I do every day." And so maybe there's some application to the world of money or the world of financial planning and financial advice. And so that, that simple insight on the part of my dad, long story short, put me down a path to be where I am today, which is sort of serving as a translator between the ivory tower of academia and the folks who do the work every day.
Yeah, so true when it comes to psychology and philosophy as a financial advisor. We deal with that every day. Sometimes we're counselors when we're talking to people. Danny, when you look at some of your past life experiences, can you name just maybe a few things that shaped your belief about money decisions and maybe how they are more emotional than, I guess, logical?
Yeah, I know one question that a lot of behaviorally minded advisors like to ask is, what was your first experience of money? And so the first memory I have of money is being in kindergarten. So, 5 or 6 years old, and bringing home the form from school that is, requires you to plug in your earning, your parents to plug in how much they make and how many dependents they have and that sort of thing to determine whether or not you get free lunch or reduced lunch, like welfare basically. And my parents fill it out and they're like, "Oh, you could get free lunch." And I thought, are we poor? Like, that was my very, it was my very first experience of money, but or my very first memory of money. And when I was, when my parents were newly married, I was born 9 months and 3 days after their wedding day. And so when my parents were newlyweds, my mom worked at McDonald's, my dad had recently dropped out of an MBA program and was cutting lawns. And so, like, I grew up, in a household that transitioned from, blue collar at the very outset to then my dad being a young advisor and, slowly beginning the process of building his business. I have a brother that's 12 years younger than me, and his attitudes toward money are so different than mine because he effectively grew up in a different household with the same parents, because my parents had achieved a level of financial success at that point that would have been, impossible for young Daniel to imagine when his parents were working, flipping burgers and cutting lawns. And so, watching that, watching the attitudinal differences between myself and my brother, I think was one of those things that put me on a path. I think having discussions around stock picking and investing and compounding at the dinner table, which I was blessed to have because of, who my dad is, that was formative. And then also I was a missionary. I dropped out of college after my freshman year. I was a missionary for my church for 2 years. I lived in the Philippines and saw an entirely different set of beliefs and perspectives and attitudes toward wealth. And I lived in a developing country and I saw how wealth corrupted and how wealth could have helped a lot. And so those, when I think about sort of formative memories, formative experiences, those couple of things would really be the ones that put me on the path to think about these things the way I do now.
And with that, in your book, Daniel, The Soul of Wealth, you talk about how financial success without personal fulfillment is hollow. What made you realize that the traditional financial advice that's out there is missing that deeper dimension?
Yeah, well, a lot of this, so some of it was statistical and some of it was personal, right? So I'll tell, the statistical side of things. I ran across a very particular statistic that was the catalyst for me writing The Soul of Wealth. The US, where I'm from, is turning 250 years old this year. It's a rough birthday year for us, but we're turning 250 this year. And when this country was founded, over 80% of the world was living in poverty. 85% of the world was living on what would be today $2 or less per day. So, 250 years ago, which is not that long, if you condense human history down to a 1 year timeline, that's like December 29th, the evening of December 29th, on your calendar year, everybody everywhere was poor. And now we've had in the subsequent 250 years, we've had this explosion of abundance. Fewer than, less than 10% of people in the world now are living in poverty. The average American home size has tripled post World War II. I mean, things that we take for granted now would have been, you know, the it would have been the dream of a king, a couple of hundred years ago. And yet, over that same 200 and something years, we're sadder, we're lonelier, we're more disconnected, we're more stressed out, and we're more anxious. And so the burning question for me was, how have we done such a good job of creating wealth and such a poor job of turning that wealth into personal fulfillment and personal happiness? And then on the personal level, just by virtue of my job, I get to work closely with many very wealthy people, like exceedingly wealthy people. And many of them have incredible family lives and are very happy and feel blessed and are thankful and have awesome lives that, any of us would kill for. And then an approximately equal number of them are kind of miserable and, haven't got it all figured out. And so being proximal to these people that had so much wealth, but didn't necessarily seem better than the average person at having turned that wealth into purpose or happiness, that was instructive to me as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Daniel, when you look at, the different books that you've written, behavioral mistakes come up quite often. Is there any financial behaviors that you personally struggle with? And if so, how do you try and manage those?
Oh, all of them. So, one of the hallmarks of my work, there's now over 200 different, sort of codified behavioral biases that can lead you to make poor financial mistakes, which for your listeners is not exactly reassuring. But there's really sort of four at the root. And much of my work has been taking those 200 and sort of distilling them down into the four big ones, so we can get our arms around them and manage them. So the four would be ego, which would be the various forms of overconfidence, thinking that we're luckier, better, smarter than the next investor. Emotion, which is just what it sounds like, privileging your feelings over the math. Attention, which is confusing things that are loud, like a bad headline, with things that are likely. Here we are. I was at the gym this morning, and there's all this talk of, hantavirus. Well, that's very loud. It's very scary. It's very lethal. But is it likely to, morph into something, much more than it is today? It's not likely. So that's one of those examples, whether it be a terrorist attack or a pandemic or something else, confusing things that are loud with things that are likely. And then the last one is conservatism, which is just the various flavors of trying to play it safe, not wanting to take risk, not wanting to lose, and being familiar with being sort of prone to default to the status quo. I am guilty of all of these. It must be said that one of the best things that I do is pay my dad to manage my money. And it's an interesting thing because, my dad, God love him, my dad's not written 4 books on money management. My dad's not written 4 books on staying out of your way and markets and things like that. He's a smart guy, but, you know, I've done more research than he has probably on this. But it doesn't matter because all of my knowledge when it comes to my money is out the door. I could tell you what you should do, but when it comes to me and my money, I'm just as scared, I'm just as emotional, I'm just as short-sighted as the next person. So some of the best money I ever spend is outsourcing that to someone who effectively serves as a blocker between me and my bad decisions.
That's excellent. So you know what your lane is, I guess, and you stay in it. So if somebody were to read your books and follow all your advice perfectly, how do you think their life would look different, not just financially, but emotionally and relationship wise?
Oh man, I hope they do it. I hope they do it. Well, I think, I've written books that are about the very practical sort of nuts and bolts of investing. And so that's important. Those were some of my first books. And you've got to do that because money does matter. Money does matter, and having enough money matters a great deal. And it even contributes to happiness. But past a certain point, once you sort of have enough, whatever that looks like for you, it becomes more about turning that money into meaning. And, in my books, I've talked about sort of the 3 Bs, and, this is like we'll share it right here on your radio program, and this is the secret to a happy life. It's believing, belonging, and becoming, right? So, believing is you need, to follow your truth. You need, to believe in something. You need some sort of framework, a philosophy, a life philosophy, for understanding, good and bad, how the world works, and you need to spend your money to make the world a nicer place. Belonging is you need a tribe, you need a family, you need people who love you, and you need people to love. So consistently, we see that people who spend money on taking trips with people they love and investing in the people they love are much happier than those who don't. And then finally, it's becoming. People who are happy have a bright sense of who they could be one day, if they invested in their own growth and development. So the people who'd read my books and perfectly apply these things, they would try and make the world a better place. They'd spend it on the people they love, and they'd try to make themselves a better version of themselves as well.
So let's get out and buy that book, The Soul of Wealth. Kevin, we're
But
towards the back end of the program. Just a final question, a thought from you?
Well, I guess, if I some last comments, I think just want to thank Daniel obviously for coming on the show today. As a financial advisor, I've been doing this for 34 years, and reading your books over the last 3 or 4 years, man, I tell you, it's really changed my practice and how I deal with people. I have different conversations. You'd think after 30 years, you'd have this down pat, but your books have really helped. And I think any other advisors that might be listening to the show today, go out, grab Daniel's book. It's going to be a great read. You can implement this stuff into your practice. I felt that the clients that I have these discussions with, it's a different conversation. They're much more open, and it's not about money. It's what money is really for. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, I just, again, Daniel, thank you very much for being on the show. If anyone wants more information, simply give the office a call at 306-975-9500, or you can go to our website, pwmprivatewealth.com.
And again, the name of the book, The Soul of Wealth. Our guest, Dr. Daniel Crosby. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you for joining us for Money Sense, where we explore meaningful conversations about money, life, and the choices that shape them both. At PWM Private Wealth Counsel, they're here to help you build a life as solid as the financial plan they've built for you. And most importantly, give you the confidence to know you're going to be okay. Financial planning services are offered through PWM Private Wealth Counsel. Portfolio management services are provided by Q Wealth, a registered portfolio manager, investment fund manager, and exempt market dealer. PWM Private Wealth Counsel is an owner and partner in the Q Wealth Partnership, where money meets meaning.